All right, I'll go ahead and just kick us off real quick. I just want to welcome everyone here for Intercultural Mindset Training. We have Juwan Smart and Dr. Marcellus Hall from Maktub Limitless that will be facilitating the training. And I am going to turn it over to them to get us started. So, Juwan, Dr. Hall, take it away.
All right. I appreciate everyone being here. That was by design to give everyone 2 minutes to join the call. So, it was all part of the plan. Just letting y'all know it's part of the plan. All right. Before we begin, I'd like to send a quick message about today's session because what we have to realize that in today's evolving social and political climate, cultural awareness is no longer optional. It is essential. Across the nation, we are witnessing concerning regression, the removal of African American history from educational spaces, the silencing of marginalized voices, and the disproportionate use of force and policy against immigrant and refugee populations. These are not isolated events. They are reflections of collective cultural negligence. This training invites the department to confront that negligence with consciousness. Cultural awareness begins with seeing the histories, the identities, and lived experiences that shape the people we serve. For government employees such as yourself, awareness is the first act of service. And it requires moving beyond tolerance into understanding, beyond neutrality into accountability. And through Maktub Limitless framework of alchemy, transforming from the lead or the foundations of what may not be appropriate or that may create negligence into the magnum opus, which is our greatest work, our highest elevation of ourselves, unlocking that limitless potential. And then the concepts of idea, mindfulness, and our C, serve, enlighten, and excel framework. This session helps you participants explore how awareness transforms both self and system. And together, we learn to recognize the unseen, listen without assumption, and build a foundation for culturally responsive policies that restore dignity, trust, and belonging for all, especially those most impacted by systemic oversight. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Juwan Smart. I'm the founder of Maktub Limitless. I help individuals and organizations unlock their potential through conscious leadership, equity-driven strategy, and transformative insight. My mission is to serve, enlighten, and help others excel, creating a more awakened and inclusive world, one shift at a time. And in doing so, I have the privilege with working with my brother and best friend, Dr. Marcellus Hall.
All right. Peace and blessings, everybody. I'm going to keep this short. I'm very happy to be here. That's why I'm smiling. It's always great to be in this space and to do it with my brother. My mission is to help him do whatever he needs to do. That's how we roll. I do what I'm told, but I love it. So happy to be here in this space with all you as always. We're going to have a phenomenal session, and I'll just leave it there. You'll hear more from me in a moment. Thank you.
He's been humble. He's a brilliant person. All right, before we begin, I'd like to center everyone. We preach and practice mindfulness. Therefore, we want to start incorporating this in the sessions that we do with y'all. So if we can have a moment before we begin, I invite everyone to take a moment to arrive, not just in the body, but in awareness. Find a comfortable posture. Let your feet rest firmly on the ground, anchoring you to this moment. Allow your hands to soften, resting on your lap or the table. And when you're ready, gently close your eyes or lower your gaze. Take a deep breath in through the nose and release it slowly through the mouth. Let's do that again. In and out. Each breath is an invitation to return home to this present space. As we breathe together, notice what you bring into this space, your thoughts, your roles, and your expectations. Notice too that you may not have realized you were carrying fatigue, bias, assumptions, maybe even fear. No judgment, just awareness. Now imagine a gentle light above your head, the light of awareness. With each breath, allow that light to move downward, illuminating your thoughts, your hearts, your hands, reminding you that awareness is the first act of compassion. In this space, we are students of humanity. We are not here to defend what we know, but to discover what we've overlooked. Let each breath remind you, awareness opens the door to transformation. When you're ready, take one more deep breath in and exhale. Feel yourself grounded, open, and fully present. Gently open your eyes if they were closed, or focus back on the screen if they were lowered in the gaze. Welcome to Cultural Awareness, recognizing and understanding differences.
All right, let's do it. Thank you. Back to Juwan for that beautiful centering piece. It's always good to connect, take a moment just to kind of woosah, be aware of oneself, because awareness is centered in everything that we do, everything that we're going to talk about in this space of cultural awareness. And I honestly am so excited. So we're going to have three particular outcomes for this session as part of a three-part series. We're going to learn how culture shapes people's living systems, shapes people, living systems, and workspace engagement, relationships, and practices. Because we're looking at cultural awareness not just from a space of being aware of our own culture and for ourselves, but also to help you with your relationships at work and your relationships that you develop to do the work that you do for the broader community, and learn how culture impacts service delivery, and learn knowledge and practices that improve cultural awareness and service delivery. Next slide. All right, so this is our agenda that we're going to go through. We went through a grounding. We talked about chemical cycle. What is cultural awareness? We're going to look at key aspects of cultural awareness, challenges, understand why cultural awareness matters, is important. We're going to look at cultural influences in the workplace, or just workplace culture, and how workplace culture has changed over the past 30 years in particular. We're going to talk about some barriers to support engagement, and we're going to look at how cultural awareness can help you improve the public service that you do, how we can overcome these challenges and increase our cultural awareness, and then with a closing and reflection before we go along our way. Next slide. All right, so before we jump into cultural awareness, right, we know that cultural awareness is being aware of one's culture as well as others and the impacts. But first, let's have I just want to talk about just have a very universal understanding. When we talk about culture, we're going to keep it very simple and plain language. We're talking about culture. We're just talking about shared practices, things that we do amongst a group that allow us to work effectively together, that we have a central understanding to what we're doing. Period. Really, that's all it is. And culture can span across ethnicity. It can span across gender, religion, things that you have in common, such as language, particular activities, ideologies, thoughts, all different types of things. So it's just a shared and agreed practice, which is beautiful, right? Because if we didn't have, an awareness of language or ideology, then we wouldn't be able to really communicate well, understand each other. So culture is one of those things that's necessary. So with that, understanding that it's necessary for all of us, we want to have a broader awareness and understanding of how culture impacts ourselves, so we can understand how it impacts others to bring us together, so we can work through those barriers and challenges. So looking at culture, and let me say this, gotta say this too. Because I will refer to certain things in gender and ethnicity, please understand that no one person is a spokesperson for their gender, for their ethnicity, for their religion, their belief. So if I say in my community, in the Black community growing up, that doesn't mean every Black community in the world. That means the community that in the culture that I experience, which is very specific to my environment. So let's just keep that with an open mind so we understand that no one person or their experience represents a universal cultural experience for everybody, because that leads to biases and stereotypes and everything that we're trying not to do. All right. So looking at culture through three specific two lenses, and we're going to simplify this. So first of all, cultural awareness recognizes the differences and similarities between one's own culture and the culture of others. Okay. So as we understand how our culture impacts us, we can understand how other people are impacted. Um, it may sound a little silly, but one of the biggest problems with culture is that a lot of people aren't aware of it because it happens so much under the lens of conscious awareness. Because culture is not something that you relatively choose. You can choose to be part of certain communities and then adapt into certain acculturational processes as you get older. But when we're talking about the language that you speak, I didn't ask to speak English. You know, I didn't. I didn't ask for my ethnicity. Not saying there's anything wrong with either or, but the point is, these are things I was born into, and my ideologies, my beliefs, my family values. I didn't have a say so, right? We're all brought up in the family and we're told by our parents, this is what we do. In our communities, this is what we believe. And, this is how we behave. In your education systems as young children, this is how we learn, right? As American citizens, this is what we believe as Americans. We were not given a voice or a chance, or opportunity to decide for ourselves. These are things that we're born into. Again, not good or bad, but it's just if we can understand that, then we can realize why it's important for us to really understand how culture impacts us. Because if not, we tend to think people should think like us. And if they don't think like us, if they don't understand the way we understand or believe what we believe, then it's kind of weird. But it's not, it's just different. That's all. And if we can understand that, we're one step closer. Cultural awareness is foundational to understanding how culture shapes people's values, beliefs, behaviors, communication styles, and perspectives. So it's one thing to understand what culture is and how culture impacts us in different ways. But it's another thing to really dive into, okay, so how did this come about, right? Where did these values come from, these belief systems, these behaviors, how we talk and express ourselves, and the way we view the world? You know, too often, we don't question that enough, which leads to predispositional thoughts that people should think like us and feel like us and act like us, right? Because we don't even question why we feel, think, believe, behave, and act the way we do. We just kind of go along with our day, right? So, in simple terms, it's the awareness that not everyone sees or experiences the world the same way you do. In psychology, we call this perspective taking, right? Um, and in other words, understanding, or the theory of thinking, right? Understanding that people experience the world differently through their memories, through all their associated feelings, and just everything that they go through growing up. It all is just like a very consolidated effect over time that compounds to how we just engage the world. So it's very different for all of us. And we're going to tap in to see how that influences us in the way we move about our daily life. Next slide. So, in addressing a cultural awareness, all right, we're going to look at cultural awareness and we're going to look at four key aspects or things. And the first one is self-awareness. Okay. Self-awareness. The reason being is because like Juwan said, compassion starts with awareness, right? We have to be aware to be able to address anything. If we're not aware, it's happening under our subconscious level, unconscious level, right? So we got to be self-aware. And when we're aware, then we can start to notice and recognize our assumptions and our biases that we all carry. All right. Then there's the knowledge of others. Once we become aware of ourselves and our assumptions, our biases, things that influence us, then we can start to look outward and say, okay, all right, well, other people carry these same nuanced differences as well. So then cultural awareness then moves us to learning about other cultures, other traditions, and other norms and other worldviews, which is very important. You may have heard me speak before in different trainings. I've lived between two different countries, England and America. My wife is from Czechoslovakia, and her family, as they represent and as they call themselves, everyone, some agree with the languages, some don't, but as they refer to themselves as Romney, as gypsies. And they're very traditional. My wife was the first one within her family ever in their entire bloodline to come to America and go to school in America. So her way of thinking and doing things is, as you can imagine, very different from mine. So being the first person of color in her family history ever, as you can imagine, it was a very interesting process the first few years. But with that, learning about their traditions and their norms and their worldviews and them taking time to get to know mine, the biases kind of just started to fade away. And we just started to see the person. And through our similar differences, we've seen that we were actually quite similar in a lot of ways. Then there's the sensitivity and respect aspect of cultural awareness. So this is okay. I recognize within myself, I am starting to learn and understand about others, but that's not enough. Cultural awareness also invites us to not judge people for their differences. Remember, everything within you that makes you you, you didn't choose. You were born into it. You know, this is just what you are, happen to be where you're from. So none of us are really in a position to judge each other. It's just an understanding that we are different in our approach to the same thing, right? And that same thing is all trying to live a good life, take care of each other, love our families, you know, do the right thing. We're all trying to get about the same way. We just do it a little differently, through different lenses, but we're all trying to achieve the same objective universally because we're all humans first. And when you wake up in the morning, no matter what country you go to, mostly all humans have the same goal: get some food, get some warmth, you know, take care of themselves, go out, do some work, you know, provide provisions for the families. Again, we just go about it differently, but we're all trying to do the same thing as a human race, as a human species. So, cultural awareness invites us not only to understand and learn about each other, but not to judge each other for our differences, because this leads to stereotypes. And then the fourth aspect, adaptability. Not enough just to accept and not judge. That's great. That's another step. It's beautiful. But to really start to benefit from trust, to build trust and to work together effectively, now we have to start to become adaptable. All right. We got to adjust some behaviors, adjust some of the way that we communicate so that we can interact with each other in a way that's respectful. For example, if I know that I use a certain way to address a man or to address a certain idea that based on Jawan's culture may be looked at as, you know, disrespectful, then I can ask, well, you know, how do you address it? And, you know, and come to an understanding so we can talk about it with the way that we're being respectful. And that's very important because sometimes cultures can clash. You know, what's perceived as norm in one culture could be perceived as disrespectful in another. And again, it's no judgment. That's okay. If we can raise our awareness to this and our sensitivity and build respect for each other, and then finally adapt for each other, then that's great. And I know some of you may say, well, Dr. Hall, why do I have to adapt to other people? Well, kind of think about it like this. If you go to work, imagine your leadership or the colleagues that you have or you're around on a regular basis addressing you any type of way they want to, because in their everyday life, it's normal. Where they come from, it's normal. And you may say, hey, could you not refer to me that way? Because it makes me feel a little uncomfortable or it's not respectful. And they say, why should I have to adapt to you? It's very normal where I come from. How would you feel? Take a moment and think about that. That's why adaptability is very important in cultural awareness. Next slide. So In the space of cultural awareness, of course, with anything, there are some challenges, right? As is above, so is below. It's just how it goes. Can't have one without the other. Um, we do experience some challenges to cultural diversity. Prejudice and discrimination, for one, very common. Prejudice, pre-existing beliefs. Discrimination is to treat people in a particular way based on their associated identity. This can be seen through the eyes of racism, xenophobia, stereotyping, misogyny, a lot of different aspects, right? Then we also have language barriers, difficulties in communication across diverse linguistic groups. This can also be a challenge in the space of cultural diversity. Not just like one person speaking Spanish and another person speaking French, but even within the same language, we have different dialects, right? America's a very vast country. So in the South, they may use certain words and terminology that's different from what they use up north. So, and being that we work in an environment that is globalized now, right? So, like I'm sitting in London right now, Jawan's sitting in Austin, Texas, and you're sitting in Colorado. You hear where I'm going? So it's different, it's different. This is not the 1920s anymore where everybody that works together is sitting in the same room and goes home to the same communities, right? So some people get off of work and drive home to a whole different city. So it's just we have to learn to adapt because a lot of different associations come into play because of our geographical differences now. And language is a big barrier that does a lot of damage because language is the way that we express ourselves. And some cultures are very literal, such as in America, whereas other cultures may not be as literal, but more so about how you say it and the body language and facial expressions associated with what you say. So language barriers can, come into play with cultural diversity. And essentially, this all leads to a lack of inclusion. Groups feeling marginalized or certain groups who are underrepresented because there's not a lot of people within a certain space that share a similar identity to them. It can make people feel like they're not part of the group. And of course, we know this leads to isolated feelings, feeling lonely, which is one of the huge problems that we're dealing with globally in the world right now. People are feeling more lonely now than ever before, even though you can pick up a phone and be connected to everyone across the world nonstop. But we've never been lonelier. Very interesting, right? And why is that? Because there's no sense of belonging, there's no sense of inclusion. So you can have access. It's totally fine. It's a big part of it. But if we're not moving in the space of compassion, respect, building those relationships and helping people feel included, and if they belong, people still feel lonely, even though they're constantly connected and around other people. So this is a big aspect when we're talking about cultural awareness, right? And with that, again, cultural clashes is another challenge to the cultural diversity. Differences in values and norms often lead to misunderstandings and conflict, right? It's the lack of understanding. Again, no culture is better than the other, it's just different. So we have to raise our awareness to understand and recognize these differences and have an understanding and move in a respectful way and then adapt so that we can start fostering those emotions and feelings associated to help us build healthy relationships. Very important. Next slide. All right. So, what are we here talking about? Why cultural awareness matters. Number one, encourages mutual respect and understanding. When we lack understanding, we're disconnected. When we're disconnected, there's a lack of respect. And when there's a lack of respect and a lack of understanding, what comes with that? Biases and stereotypes. Biases, preconceived notions and ways of thinking and beliefs that we have about people. Sometimes these biases can be implicit and or explicit. So implicit, we may not be aware of these biases or the way that we're thinking and how they can harm other people or make people feel uncomfortable. Or, it could be explicit and we are aware of these differences and, we just don't care. Either way, it's a problem. Stereotypes, very oversimplified and generalized belief systems about other people. This is often when you hear, how women are. you know how men are, you know how this particular ethnicity is. No, not at all. Not at all. You know, I can't tell you how black people are because I don't know every black person that exists. Probably, so I can't represent and tell you how everyone who is black thinks to say black people are a certain way or to say men are a certain way. I don't know every man on the face of this planet, and I don't have a universal consensus of why we do anything that we do, right? It just doesn't work like that. So when we make these assumptions, it's really harmful. Even if you belong to that identity group, it's still harmful because you're not a spokesperson for everyone associated with that identity group across the entire world. Okay. So we have to be very careful with these stereotypes. And again, this is why cultural awareness really matters. And if we can adapt and we can move in a space of respect and understanding, you know what happens? Guess what? It inspires cultural transformation and social change, right? That adaptability piece that I talked about, we start to adapt and we start to move in a way that's respectful for others. Again, go back to my wife. There are things that I had to adapt to because she comes from a different world, a different culture, and vice versa. There are things that she learned to adapt to on my behalf because when that didn't happen, it created conflict, right? We care about each other and we love each other, and but we're not always aware how our culture is just so ingrained within us. We're not always aware of how it surfaces and infects other people around us. So this is very important, right? To get to that space. All right, next slide. So let's look at how cultural awareness and culture shapes the person, right? Because I said it's very complex. And so let's talk about some norms and values. We could take a moment. I love talking, but I love to get other people involved too. So this is an opportunity. I just want you to share with me. I just want to hear what you got to say. I see we're already getting to it in the chat. So let's talk about a cultural norm. Let's take a moment. Can somebody put a cultural norm or a cultural value in the chat, based on where they come from? What do we got? What do we have?
I'm sorry, I must have been on my mind, so don't think I know.
It's fine. It's fine. It's fine. Family dinner. Excellent. Family dinner. That's beautiful. Not because check this out. And this is how culture works. Family dinner happens very differently amongst different cultures. For example, in my wife's culture, when I came into the family, um, I remember having my wife sit at the dinner table with me, and all the men were looking. I didn't notice my wife was the only person at the table with me, only female, and they were looking at me like, "What is he doing?" Guess what? Because the women and the men didn't sit at the same table together, and the children didn't sit at the same table with the adults. So, just something as simple as family dinner can be very contrast and different across different cultures. And this is why cultural awareness is important. Someone said quiet time. That's another one. Very important. Religion, another aspect, different practice in spirituality, knowing your neighbors. Some people say, hey, when somebody comes into the neighborhood, we walk over and say hello. The neighborhood I grew up in, might not want to do that. So it's very different for different people, right? Very, very, very different. What about communication? Eye contact popped up right on time, right? Communication is different. What about that? What is some differences in the culture you experienced with communication? Not communicating feelings. Ah, very interesting. Very interesting. We respect our elders and never talk back. Yes, very true. Same as me. When I was a teenager, I was adopted into a family, into a family from Samoa. So my teenage years, I grew up in a Samoan culture, and let me tell you, it was a very big adjustment because their formalities were very different from the formalities coming from an African American family. So there were a lot of adaptability that had to be had there. Men tend to hold in emotion. Children are meant to be seen but not heard. And think about all this. Think about everything that you're saying. not communicating feelings, how that can affect you emotionally growing up, not being able to communicate what you feel, right? Um, not questioning anything adults tell you or say to you. Now, I get it, but at the same time, it can have people develop to become very submissive or become very anxious around authority figures as they get older. So again, it's not a right or wrong thing. It's just understanding how culture can really shape shift the way we experience the world throughout our entire lifespan. Um, what about some beliefs, attitudes, and worldviews? Let's talk about that. Let's talk about that. Um, I remember one thing my mom used to say. She says, "We eat to live. We don't live to eat." You know, that's one thing she's my mother from Samoa used to always say. She was very big on not taking anything more than your share. You know what I mean? Another thing, she would always tell us that if you offer to do something for somebody, don't expect anything in return. Like, don't do things with an expectation that, hey, if I did this for you, then this means you're going to help me or you're going to do this for me. She's like, no, we don't work like that. So that was very different than in my biological family. They were like, well, I did this for you. You gonna do this for me, right? So again, very differences in how we have views. Um, how about learning processes, right? Because we learn through observation, we learn through imitation, and then we learn through education. So those are three ways that we learn. We observe people, and then we do it, and we imitate it, and then we're also taught to do things. So, what are some learning processes that you may have had growing up? Like, how were you taught to do things? You know, were you showed and did someone walk you through things step by step, or or was it one of those things that you were taught to do things like on your own? You had to have a trial and observation kind of experience for yourself. Someone said, dive in the deep end and learn to swim. Some people go through that literally. You want to learn how to swim? There you go, swim, right? Yeah, and that's very true. Some people dive in the deep end. Now, what about identity? I'm glad that we're talking about these. Joanne, I want you to hold on to some of these ideas because we're going to talk about how these different cultural learnings show up in work. And then we'll see why sometimes when you go to work, it's like, what's going on? Because you cannot separate a person from their culture. You don't walk out the door and leave your culture behind. You bring it with you because it's in you, right? So that can contribute to sometimes the conflict that we see on the job. What about identity? Last one. How has culture affected you in ways of identity? We're talking about how we see ourselves, what we think is possible. For example, some cultures may say, all right, well, you're a man. So as a male, you must feel this way, you must act this way, behave this way. Some cultures, because you're a female, certain opportunities aren't afforded to you. There are limitations on what you can achieve or what conversations you should be a part of because of your identity. How has your identity from a cultural perspective impacted your life? What were you taught? Hyper independence. Um, must be a caretaker. Beautiful, beautiful. All right. Our cultural identity was also from what the media has showed us. This is very true. Very true. Very true. Someone said Ebony and Jet showed us Black Hat. Now I remember them Ebony and Jet magazines. They're about this big as a kid. There we go. I remember that. That's beautiful. Yeah, that's a little memory lane right there, a little nostalgia. All right, next slide, please, sir. All right. So think about what I just said. All those things we just talked about. So imagine now work. And I want us to all get involved in this too, right? So cultural, basically, this is culture in the workplace, how we communicate, how leadership interacts with people, right? It's different across cultures. Our work ethic, time orientation. Do we work 9 to 5 or do we work all around the clock? Should you always be available? Teamwork and collaboration. Do we work together? Do we work asynchronously? Do we try to get different ideas from each other? How are we motivated, and what motivates us on the job? And what are some of our workplace etiquette and practices? Think about all this and how and culture in the workplace. Now remember, culture cannot happen without people. So it's people that bring these ideas and these behaviors to work. So when you think about all the differences in culture that we just tapped into and talked about, you can now see why we have different communication styles at work, different types of leadership, right? Different ways of work ethics. You have different team leaders that expect you to work differently, or different ideas on how we collaborate. So can somebody please look at any of these pillars and tell me, how has culture from your experience influenced what you've seen on the job? Whether it's how people communicate with each other, whether it's how leadership and authority is expressed, whether it's work ethic and time orientation practices, how you work together in teams and collaborate, maybe what you're motivated by. Some people are motivated by only by promotion. Other people are motivated by the fact of doing well together as a unit and what's best for overall workplace etiquette. What are your thoughts? Share with me. How have you seen culture show up in one of these spaces? Some people hesitate speaking without being cued. Being direct as a woman has been viewed negative. It can vary by team. That's right. Work-life balance, beautiful. Offer something. Yes. Communications, work ethics, team, patience. Yes. So we've all seen how culture shows up in the workplace, right? Because we can't separate people from culture. We bring that to work. Next slide. So now just think about this. We're all different ages here. We span across different decades. Think about how culture in the workplace has changed over the years, right? There was a time when you communicated with somebody, don't be on the fifth floor when they on the 50th floor, because the only way to y'all to talk, somebody had to take that journey. And if your knees was bad, you probably won't communicate with you. Like, man, I ain't going up them steps. But now we got email. You got people WhatsApping you, and they in the same room and three desks down. They talking to you. Are you here at work? They on WhatsApp, and we got the instant messengers. Leadership and power dynamics, right? They're different. Now we work in a generation that you got to be careful with how you assert authority, right? You got to be careful with that. Everyone's not just going to take, however you come at them because you're the one in charge, especially with our newer generations, is much different. Leadership and power dynamics have very much shift. We also have organizations that have flat hierarchies as well, right? So it's very different. Think about the diversity and equity. As I said, we're sitting thousands of miles apart right now, and we're all having this conversation. You weren't doing that in 1960s, right? So if you were working with somebody and talking to somebody, they were in the same room with you, which meant that you most likely worked with people that came from a similar cultural background as you, right? But nowadays it's so different. We could be on a call with people from 20 different countries. So that influences how culture shows up in the workplace. Work-life balance, wellness, gym memberships, meditation rooms, all these different things that we have now that wasn't available before. The way mental health access is provided. Professional growth and employee expectations. People expect opportunities to learn. People expect opportunities to grow, right? Where years ago, whatever role you stepped into, you could be there 30 years and that might be the same role you in when you leave. And that was to be expected. Nowadays, people are like, what? If I don't see a promotion in 3 years, I'm gone. Like if I'm in the same spot I was back in 2022, it's 2025, I'm out of here, right? Which also brings us to loyalty. Back in the day, it was normal to be with a company 30, 40, 50, 60 years. Nowadays, it's normal for people to switch companies every 5 years. to get promoted. And that's considered to be healthy for some people, depending on what field you're in. So culture has really changed, and we got to learn to adapt and to change with it. Next slide. So what are the barriers that we're facing in support engagement? Think about everything we talked about. Communication barriers, right? Difference in dialects and the way communication is expressed and received. Our different belief systems, expectations, and biases, even under provider, right? Think about this when you're dealing with people, especially who are in the immigration process, and understanding that our expectations as a provider are different from their expectations based on the culture that they're coming from. Gender modesty norms can be a barrier, right? Especially when we're talking about gender, because depending on where people are coming from, there may be only a certain way that they believe is acceptable to engage with you and you with them because of gender differences. Mental health stigma, right? Some cultures look at mental health stigmatized. Some cultures say, no, it's more of a spiritual thing. They're just different. It's a spiritual implication as opposed to something mental health related. Also, you're also working with some people who come from countries where they lived through a war. They've experienced genocide. And you may come from a culture background where the only fight you've seen was on the playground at school. So totally different, right? Time and appointments. America's like, be here on time. You got a 15-minute slot, you're out the door. And they may be looking at you like, that's very rude and disrespectful. You didn't even ask how I was doing. You didn't even consider me first. Some people in cultures, you talk to the person and deal with them first before you get down to the business to talking about the actual factuals, right? And this also leads to trust in institutions, again, depending on their cultural experiences from the countries that they come from and what they've been through, as well as if they live in rural areas here in America or certain urban areas that are very impoverished, their trust in the institution may be a little, not so great. So it's going to take a little bit more on your part to get them to open up and to work alongside you. Next slide. All right. So how does cultural awareness then help us improve public service? Remember, we talked about respect, right? Respect for diverse cultural identities builds trust. It increases community involvement. You show respect, you're going to get respect. Very simple, right? Services that are more relevant, accessible, and acceptable. Okay. Tailoring services to align with the expectations and needs of people based on their different geographic, geopolitical identities. Very important. All right. When this happens, people feel seen and heard. So this is going to reduce disparities. Also going to open them up to work alongside you more effectively. Okay. This is going to lead to more inclusive and participatory processes, which are going to lead to more effective practices. And the people that are directly impacted by these policies should be the main people that you're talking to, right? Because there's nothing worse than people sitting up here making policies and laws about you, and they ain't even come talk to you, but they're telling you what's best for you. But they ain't the one on the receiving end. Like, we got to do better than that, right? So through cultural awareness, we have self-reflection. This is going to help us reduce those biases and build those characteristics that lead to us fostering spaces of belonging and increasing psychological safety and overall better communication. Next slide. All right. So again, to overcome these challenges, just to kind of draw back on what we were talking about and to consolidate it into very simple points, we need education and awareness, promoting cultural understanding through education, like what we're doing now with this formal training, having open dialogue, having conversations with people across different cultural groups. And then with the policies, we need to enforce these policies, okay? Not just draw these policies up, these regulations, and have these rules and have them that exist, but we have to stand on them and make sure that we're doing our part to enforce it so that they're actually benefiting people. Very important. And then this last one, I love it. Now, I don't know about you, but when I grew up, I used to have my homeboy, his name Ivan Chavez. And I used to love when they came around. I put that sombrero on. I go over there, be hitting my little dance with them. I didn't understand what they were saying, but the food was amazing. He used to translate some of the history to me, and I just loved it. being involved. And hey, I was getting it now. So celebrate your diversity with each other. Be a part of each other's culture and bring each other in. Yeah, I see Carla put that little sauce out, and come on, I know about that flamingo. I used to hit that step. I used to live in Spain, so I knew about hitting that step. So hey, celebrate each other, love on each other. Okay, very, very important. Next slide. All right. So again, to draw it down to the 5 main points to increase cultural awareness, we want to train staff with a cultural lens and understanding. We want to make sure we're adapting communication. We want to customize service delivery so that we align with what people need specifically. We want to make sure that we involve community representation, have people who are directly impacted involved in the conversations, engage cultural mediators, community leaders, and cultural liaisons in service planning and delivery. And lastly, if we know better, do better. How does this happen? Evaluate the outcomes of data regularly and inform policies, adapt them, improvise, and do better. Next slide. All right. So the last thing we're going to do is this cultural self-awareness check-in. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to read a statement, and I want you to rate yourself as honestly as you can on a scale of 1 to 5. All right. On a scale of 1 to 5. 1 is strongly disagree. 2 is disagree. 3 is neutral. 4 is agree. 5 is strongly agree. So I'm going to repeat that so people know what to rate themselves as. Next slide. Let's go through these. Again, 1 is strongly disagree. Jawan, can you write that in the chat for me? 1 is strongly disagree. Thank you, sir. 2 is disagree. 3 is neutral. 4 is agree. 5 is strongly agree. Here we go. I'm aware of my own cultural background and how it shapes my worldview. If you want, just throw the number in the chat box. It's okay. I'm fine with that. Let's participate. All right. Okay. I like it. I like it. Question 2. I recognize that everyone has biases, including myself. Including myself. Jawan, Miss Sarah Davis raised her hand. If you can tap in and see what she needs. Number 3, I regularly reflect on how my upbringing and experiences influence my thoughts and behaviors towards others. Do you think about that? Right? Because many of us are 40, 50 plus years old. So do you think about how you were taught, 40 years ago, 50 years ago, influences how you behave towards others today? Number 4, I can identify specific stereotypes I may have absorbed about certain groups. And this is a good one. It's okay. It's okay. We have stereotypes that we absorb about particular groups of people. And you know what's so interesting? This isn't just out groups. This also can be, stereotypes that you develop about even people who identify with you. I'll be honest with you. I'm just we family hick puff. I ain't gonna lie to you. I ain't gonna lie to you. Sometimes I go back home to the States, I get to the soil, my cousins say, hey, you wanna uh you wanna you wanna go here to this event? And I'll be asking, who's gonna be there? She's like, what do you mean? You know what I mean. Who gonna be there? Because if everybody in there looking like me, I'm just being honest. I know where I come from, and I might not go. I might not go. I might not. All right. I'm open to learning how my behavior may unintentionally harm and exclude others. Think about that. That's a big one. I'm open to learning how my behavior may unintentionally harm and exclude others. Because a lot of times we don't mean to be disrespectful. We don't mean to exclude people. Again, you wake up and you do what you do. You do what you've always done as far as you can remember. You don't know the harm that it does. And that's okay. That's why we have to have spaces like this where we can talk about it and we can share and learn without judgment. Next slide. I treat all people with respect, even if their values or beliefs differ from mine. Oh, I treat all people with respect, even if their values or beliefs are different from mine. All right, I still have 4 or 5, so we're in a good space. I love that. I make an effort to understand perspectives that are unfamiliar or uncomfortable to me. Now that's deep. I make an effort to understand perspectives, people's train of thought, people's views that are unfamiliar, and they may even be a little uncomfortable to you. And this is a very interesting one because I'll give you an example, a little bit controversial, but it is what it is. Respect for all people and cultures. If you come to America and you talk about arranged marriages, people might look at you a little funny. But then we got a lot of other cultures where arranged marriages are still being utilized today and for their own reasons. Again, no judgment, right? So that's a conversation, that's a conversation. I avoid making assumptions based on someone's appearances, accent, or background. I avoid making assumptions based on someone's appearance, accent, or background. If you're throwing 4s or 5s, I just want to tell you I appreciate that. I've been on the receiving end of that before. All right, number 9, I seek clarification when I don't understand someone's cultural expression or behavior. I seek clarification when I don't understand someone's cultural expression or behavior. I'm gonna tell you, I just tell you, my wife from Czech Republic, this is every day for me. I be having, what do you mean by that? What do you mean by that? And it's just, you got to do it. You got to ask the question. You got to ask the question. Number 10, I adapt my communication style when engaging with people from different cultures. I adapt my communication style when engaging with people from different cultures. Next slide. Juwan, I noticed this last slide, 11 through 15, we have it on there twice. So once we go through that, yeah, we'll just go. I actively consider cultural factors when providing services to clients or colleagues. Do you do that? Do you consider cultural factors when you're providing services? Number 12, do you advocate for inclusive practices in your workplace or community? I advocate for inclusive practices and inclusive practices in my workplace or community. 13, I recognize when systemic or institutional biases may affect service delivery. I recognize when systemic or institutional biases may affect service delivery. All right, last 2, I'm comfortable addressing bias or discrimination when I witness it. I am comfortable addressing bias or discrimination when I witness it. And we gotta have some love for people and compassion for people, because this is another thing where culture is different. Some cultures, they'll tell you, hey, if you don't address it, if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. But some people's cultures are like, hey, if it ain't got nothing to do with you right there in the moment, we leave it alone, right? So this is another thing where we have to be understanding with each other and not judge each other. I see diversity as the strength that enhances the quality of service we provide. I see diversity as a strength that enhances the quality of service we provide. All right, good job. Well, that's it for me, Hick Puff family. It has been a wonderful, beautiful time. I'm going to pass it over to my brother from another and let him bring us home. Thank you for sitting with me, being with me, teaching and learning with me, alongside me. And I leave you with the proverb: do not follow me, I may not lead. Do not walk in front of me, I may not follow. Walk beside me so that we may be one. Peace and love, peace and blessings. Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Juwan?
Awesome. I don't know how to follow up with that aside just close out and with some awareness and action. So as we bring the session to a close, I invite you to take this final mindful pause a moment together what this experience has stirred within you. Place your feet flat on the ground once again. Feel your body supported by the earth beneath you. Allow your shoulders to relax, your hands to rest, your breath to find its rhythm. Take a deep breath in and let it go. Now, reflect gently on what you've seen today, heard, or felt today. Perhaps you've recognized a bias you didn't know you held, or a truth that has been waiting to be acknowledged. Remember, awareness is the first step in transformation, and it's not passive. It is movement. It is service. Within Maktub, Limitless, we speak of the path to see, serve, enlighten, and excel. To serve is the act with awareness, to meet others where they are without assumption or judgment. To enlighten is to shine light into what was unseen, to seek understanding in place of reaction. And to excel is to embody what you've learned, to bring awareness into motion, shaping systems and relationships that uplift everyone they touch. Now take a breath in. Feel the awareness expand through you. Exhale and imagine that awareness extending outward into your work, your words, your daily choices. Every policy you write, every person you greet, every decision you make carries energy. Let that energy be guided by awareness, the awareness that all people, regardless of background or circumstance, are worthy of dignity, respect, and belonging. Inhale once more, awareness rising. Exhale fully, awareness becoming action. As we close, remember, awareness is not a lesson to complete, it's a lifelong practice to live. May you each continue to serve with humility, enlighten with empathy, and excel with integrity. Thank you for being present and for choosing awareness as your beginning. Aaron or Dana, I pass it to you.
Thank you, Jawan and Dr. Hall. Very, very powerful session. I appreciate you. Just know that this was part 1. So part 2 will be coming to you January 12th. So you should have gotten the invite to where you could register for part 2 and part 3. So if you haven't done that yet, please do so. But again, thank you both. Very powerful. And we look forward to part 2 in January. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Have a great day.